If you're consistent with your weekly testing, you're going to catch it before it spirals. But if you get a little lazy like most experienced hobbyists do from time to time, the first sign there's actually a problem will be this: nuisance algae. I'm Matthew, your BRS beginner guru, and today we're going to teach you how to tackle a phosphate spike. For a beginner, high phosphate, or P04, leads to nuisance algae. And if I was a betting man, which I happen to be, I would give 10-to-1 odds that the #1 reason most beginners quit within the first year is either fish disease or nuisance algae. Not only can high P04 levels lead to nuisance algae growth, but it can also stunt the growth of your corals. But how do I know if my phosphate levels are spiking? By far the best way to detect a P04 spike is by consistent weekly water testing. Do yourself a favor and splurge a little on the Hanna Phosphate Checker. I've used this one right here for over 3 years, and I have no hesitation in saying it's the best on the market and that every hobbyist should have one. Catching a P04 spike early is absolutely crucial for success. First off, if you can catch the phosphate spike early, then you can figure out what's causing it and remove the problem before having to resort to some sort of chemical media. Secondly, if you don't catch it early enough before the nuisance algae takes off, you're going to be really confused when you break out your phosphate checker and it reads 0.00, even though your tank is full of nuisance algae. A P04 spike looks like a bell curve. As it starts to rise, microscopic algae start to grow on your rock due to the available food source, fertilizer, which is phosphate. As the bell curve keeps growing, the algae growth takes off. Once the curve reaches the peak, that means the nuisance algae is consuming as much phosphate as you're putting into the tank. But even though the phosphate levels have spiked, you probably won't even notice the algae growth because it's so small at this point. But the algae growth will continue as it consumes more and more phosphate, slowly lowering the bell curve until the readable phosphate in your water column is actually 0. By this time, you just started noticing the nuisance algae growing in your tank, so you rush to get your Hanna Phosphate Checker and are just sitting there scratching your head wondering, why is it 0 parts per million? So you say to yourself, well, my P04 levels are at 0, so there must be something else that is causing the nuisance algae growth. And then you start down this never-ending rabbit hole of spectrum, PAR changes, carbon dosing, and other sledgehammer cures. So what are the common causes of a phosphate spike? By far the most common cause of a P04 spike in your tank is fish food. Pellet food is an absolutely notorious culprit because it's so nutrient dense and it's really easy to overfeed. The second common cause of phosphate spiking in your tank is fish waste, which is of course directly related to fish food. Thirdly, we have livestock death. As your fish and inverts decay, they release phosphate into the water column. And lastly is actually nuisance algae itself, because as it grows, parts of it will break off, and if those aren't removed, they will break down, releasing all of that stored phosphate back into the water column, creating this never-ending vicious cycle. So how do you prevent a P04 spike from occurring in the first place? Well, if you're using your Hanna checker on a weekly basis and you notice your phosphates start to creep up, here are a few things you can do to prevent it from getting too high. First up, you have a water change. A 50% water change will remove 50% of the phosphate from your tank. That is, of course, assuming you're using distilled or RODI water that doesn't contain any phosphate. Number 2 is to reduce feeding. Overfeeding is way more common than underfeeding, so just by reducing your feeding a little bit can curtail a phosphate spike. Thirdly, we have changing your fish food. Substituting frozen food for pellet food can help a lot because frozen food isn't nearly as nutrient dense and it doesn't come with all those fillers which can increase the phosphate levels. Switching to something like Hikari mysis shrimp is probably your best option here. And lastly, you can beef up your cleanup crew. Slightly raised phosphate levels of between 0.1 and 0.15 parts per million aren't necessarily a problem if you have the right cleanup crew that will eat the nuisance algae before it grows too large. But to do this, you will need a mix of snails, crabs, maybe conches, and also some beneficial fish such as tangs and algae-eating blennies. But if you've utilized all these methods and your P04 just keeps going up, it probably means you have a bioload imbalance, which just means you have a little bit too much livestock for the size of your tank. Not to worry, this is super common, and luckily there are some chemical medias that can help. Broadly speaking, there are 3 kinds of chemical medias that will help reduce the amount of phosphate in your water column. GFO, also known as Granular Ferric Oxide, GFO Infused Resin, and liquid additives such as lanthanum or lanthanum. Honestly, I don't actually know how to pronounce it correctly. Number 1, liquid additives such as Elimifos Rapid from Tropic Marin or Phosphate E from Brightwell Aquatics. Don't use these products. They're great products and will absolutely reduce P04 in your tank, but they are a terrible idea for beginners for a whole myriad of reasons, which I'm not going to go into right now. Just don't use them if you're a beginner. Next up, you have GFO infused resins like this one called PhosFX from Blue Life USA. This is such a great product because it combines the phosphate removal ability of GFO with rechargeable resin beads. This 250 milliliter bag can treat up to 250 gallons of salt water. And when combined with Regen FX, it can be regenerated 6 or more times. Other benefits is it's not dusty like GFO, it won't disintegrate if you tumble it a little too much, and it comes with its own media bag. Since 250 milliliters would be way too much for most tanks, you can remove the amount you need and either keep using the included media bag or put it in a reactor. But by far, our number 1 selling phosphate reduction media is BRS Granular Ferric Oxide, either the standard or the high capacity. The most tried and true phosphate removal media out there. There are many different companies that produce their own GFO, such as Seachem's, Phosbond, D&D, Roaphos, Two Little Fishies, Phosband, Aquaforest Phosphate Minus, and Brightwell Aquatics Feroxyphos G. I'm sure they all work just fine, but I have used the BRS high capacity GFO for over 8 years now, so I can recommend it with confidence. A small amount, especially of the high capacity GFO, can go a long way. BRS GFO can be used in a media bag, but will be more effective at removing phosphate if gently tumbled in a reactor. But please remember this, more GFO is not better. In fact, it can bottom out your phosphate levels, which can have dire consequences for your reef tank. Don't make a mistake. Click here to learn how to properly use GFO. And as always, everyone, thanks for watching. Happy reefing, be well. We'll see you next time.